Hello and welcome back. My name is Dr. Christopher Gennari, and this is Great Big History Podcast. In this episode, we do the Reformation and science, two massive topics in one little bitty episode. Because the theme we're going to have is who gets to explain the world. So, who controlled knowledge before the Reformation? And the answer was the church. The church did. The church was knowledge. The church had the Bible. The Bible was in Latin, so most people couldn't read it. The church was the traditional holder of knowledge. It had the Bible. It also had classical knowledge. It also had Greek and Roman knowledge. Remember, because it needed the Greek and Roman knowledge, like Aristotle and Plato, to explain Christian theology of the late Roman, late antiquity, early Middle Ages period. Like St. Augustine, in his book City of God, uses Plato. So you have to keep Plato. So the church has both the Bible and Greek and Roman knowledge. And at the center of this was a theocentric universe, a God-centered universe. God was at the center of it. Everybody else were actors on God's stage. It's kind of Shakespeare, right? All the world's a stage and all the men merely players. Like, that's the way the church thought. It was God's universe. God created it. And we were just all acting out our parts in God's larger play. Now, the Reformation is a fight over that. It's a fight to change who controls knowledge. That instead of the church, it was the individual. You, not an institution, could determine knowledge. That's completely new. Nobody had that idea before. Not since the end of the Roman Empire. So we're talking roughly 1,000 years. If knowledge for the church was based on the Bible and classical stuff, what is the Reformation going to base its knowledge on? If it's going to be the individual, where's the individual going to get knowledge from? And that's an open question at the start. So we'll see where it goes. But instead of a theocentric universe, a God-centered universe, what the Reformation is going to usher in is humanism. That the most important actor in the world is you, is the human. That the world is, your life is about you. You're not the actor in God's play. You are the hero of your own story, of your life. And we're going to see as we get into philosophy, that makes a huge difference in how one thinks about one's identity. So what was Martin Luther's most important argument? That the Catholic Church needed reform. He had 95 problems and the Pope was one. He nails the 95 Theses to the church door at Wittenberg, Wittenberg, in Wittenberg, Germany. And the Catholic Church didn't care. Literally couldn't care less. It was an Italian Catholic church that was 1,500 years old and had a monopoly on knowledge in the continent of Europe. What do they care about one lonely, complaining German monk out in the middle of nowhere? And that turns out to be the problem, because it turned out that lots of people had problems. In fact, when we start with the Reformation, we start with Martin Luther, but complaints about the Catholic Church go way back and have been accelerating. And what the Catholic Church really didn't appreciate was that literacy was increasing, and the invention 50 years earlier, 75 years earlier, of the metal printing press was going to allow somebody, sooner or later, to mass produce complaints. The printing press, the original printing press, the glory of the printing press was not that it made books. It made books very, very slowly. The glory of the printing press was that it was a copier. That once you could get one page down, you literally pressed. You pressed a weight against the paper and pressed that into the ink against the metal, into the metal letters. So if you wanted a book, you had to change all that, get a new piece of paper, put in all the new letters, all the new periods, all the new commas, and you'll notice in early printing, there's none of that. There's no punctuation at all for that very reason, that it just took more time to put this stuff all in. And it just takes time to make books. It's very hard. But one page, once you got that one page of type down, you put the ink on top, you put the page in, you put the paper in, you pressed it, boom, you put another page in, you press it, it's a copier. And Martin Luther was a master. Now, I'm Catholic, and I'm not a big Martin Luther fan. There's a lot of problems with Martin Luther. But credit where it's due, Martin Luther was a master of the one-page summary. He would love Twitter. Blogging, he'd go on and on and on and on and on. You'd be bored to death. But Twitter, he would be a master of it. He could get a extremely complex theological argument down to one page in a way that educated people could read and uneducated people could listen to and understand. And his basic argument of his 95 Theses was the Catholic Church was too remote. It didn't listen to people. He had been complaining. Other people had been complaining. And the Catholic Church, stuck in Rome with all of its Italians, didn't care. It was too rich. Well, of course it was rich. It was taking in money from the churches all over Europe. It had a monopoly on this every Sunday. It was allied with the kings, and it was based in Italy, the richest part of Europe, because of its ties to Middle Eastern Silk Road trade. So the Catholic Church was too rich. It was too caste-like. That once you were in the group, there was no classes, there's no movement. It was all, it was all. Once you were in, you were stuck in a lot of ways. It was very hard to move up, to become cardinals, to become bishops. It was, it was all male. There's no women in this. And it was too caste-like. And the caste especially came down on ethnic lines. Italians got the best jobs. It was too isolated, too decadent from the people they preached to. You had Italian priests in silk robes preaching in Latin, a language nobody understands, to poor German people about giving money to the church for salvation through, quote, good works. Like, how is that connecting with people? And that was Martin Luther's biggest problem. And his argument, his solution was, people can find their own way to heaven. They don't need the church. They just have to read the Bible. If they live like Jesus, they'll get to heaven. See, the whole point of the Catholic Church is not the silk robes, it's not the candles, it's not the church, it's not the frescoes, it's not the painted walls, it's not the 35-foot tall crucifix in the front. It's there to get you to heaven. And for Martin Luther, you don't need them to get to heaven. You've got Jesus and you've got the New Testament. So all you have to do is read the Bible. The problem, of course, is it's not in German. It's not in French. It's not in English. It's not in a local language. The Catholic Church monopolizes that language. So if you're going to get to heaven, you're going to have to read the Bible, but you're going to need a Bible in a language you can read. Remember, if you were in my 101 class, you know this from the Quran, right? The big problem of the Quran is, of course, nothing that's in the Quran. The big problem of the Quran was it was written in Arabic, which was a language nobody could read. So, what were the advantages and disadvantages of Luther's argument about that you could get yourself into heaven? You don't need priests. All you have to do is read the Bible. Well, the advantage is humanism, that you are important, you matter. Like, that's huge. Instead of being just a cog in God's machine, you are important. Your life is important. Your education is important. Your thoughts are important. Your actions are important. You are the most important actor in your life. You are the hero of your story. The second thing is education. To have humanism, to read the Bible, you have to be able to read, write, think, analyze. So you have to have an education. Everybody needs to read a Bible in their own language, not in Greek, not in Latin, though if you can, that's great for you. But you're going to have to learn to read and write. And here's the thing. Once you can learn to read one thing, you can read anything. Which is why there's always been book burnings, why there's always been a control ever since the Assyrians. If you took my 101 course, you know this. They controlled knowledge in their great library of Nineveh. There's always an attempt to control what people read. Because once you can read anything. So whether it's the Assyrians banning people from reading their own religious texts and hiding them away in Nineveh, or it's the confiscation of classroom libraries in Florida schools. The thought is the same, that knowledge is dangerous and it must be controlled. And if you can read one thing, you can read anything. So that's a huge advantage and a lot of trust for people. The disadvantage of Luther's argument is it puts a lot of trust in people. One, very few people can read. And even those who can read are going to end up interpreting the Bible differently than Luther. Luther, I am not a Luther scholar, but the Luther scholars I knew in grad school told me that he honestly believed that everyone would read the Bible and get the same conclusions he got from it. And you know what happened? Immediately, people said, no, Luther, you're wrong. So he translates the New Testament, he hands it to people, says, read this, you're going to have the same idea I have. And immediately, people go, no, I don't. I think you're wrong. So one is nobody can read, and the people who can read are going to argue with Luther. So while Lutheranism is the beginning of Protestantism, almost from the very beginning, Protestantism breaks apart into lots of little pieces. And think about, like, you have the Catholic Church on one side, right? And there is the Catholic Church. Now, the Catholic Church broke into two pieces. It's the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church. Now, it's not the Catholic Church. It was the Christian Church broke into two pieces, the Orthodox in the East and the Catholic in the West, because Orthodoxy did not come out of Catholicism. Let's just state that. They were two pieces that had a divorce. The Mother Church had a divorce between 700 and 1,000, and you got the Latin Catholic Church in the West and the Greek-speaking Orthodox Church in the East. Right? From the Catholic Church comes Lutheranism. From Lutheranism comes everything. Anglicanism, all the way down to Mormons. All the way down to the people who hold snakes in Louisiana, the speaking in tongues, the tent revivals, the Southern Baptists, the First Baptists. All of those are, quote, Protestants. The Methodists, the Amish, the Mennonites, the Quakers, they're all, quote, Protestants. So we start with the break of Catholicism into Lutheranism and Catholicism, but then Lutheranism immediately breaks up into 1,000 pieces. It splinters. You get national churches, you get different philosophies, based on different readings of the Bible. Another disadvantage is kind of the George Carlin, Winston Churchill understanding of people. And that is, George Carlin said, think about how stupid the average person is. And then realize that half of them are stupider than that. Right? These are the people who are going to interpret the Bible. The Bible is how many different books? 50, 60 different books. It's not one book. It's written over roughly 1,000 years, 600 years, from the 500s BC to the 100s AD. It's written in multiple different languages by multiple different cultures in multiple different times about multiple different things from multiple different perspectives. Bible contradicts itself. And not everything in the Bible was in the original religious books. There are Jewish books that are not in the Old Testament. Lots of them. There are the Gnostic Gospels. There are plenty of philosophers, Origen being one of them, who none of their stuff gets in the Bible. So there's a lot of literature that got cut out in the early days, that got edited out. The Bible is a political book created by people for a purpose. And doesn't make it bad. But you have to understand that in order to understand it. And most people don't. And it's not, and let's be honest, they're not trained in theology. They're not trained, they don't read the Greek stuff in the original language, much less the Hebrew stuff in an ancient Hebrew that's even harder to read than modern Hebrew. You know, the translations, like how many translations are there? Wills become shalls? That's a big change. And so you can't fault people for this. But also giving them the Bible and saying, find your own way to heaven is like giving a child a loaded gun. So it's not a surprise that it goes off. It's a dangerous thing because it's a complex book. So all the people who do like Bible study, that's good. And if they have a minister or a rabbi, a priest, a theologian, somebody who's educated in this, who can help guide it, that's all the better. You know, and it's not aided by the fact that the Gospels are 4 different books written at 4 different times by 4 different groups for 4 different audiences, and they don't agree on almost anything. And then every weekend, we mush them together as if they're one thing. One weekend it's Luke, the next weekend it's John, the next weekend is as if they're the same thing. And so the way we read the Bible or disseminate the stories of the Bible doesn't help people. So this isn't one of those like people are dumb and it's their fault. It's not. They were uneducated and they are giving something that Luther's very educated. And he's like, just be like me. Well, most people don't have the time, the money, the energy to be like him, the privilege to be like Luther. You know, Luther's a PhD in theological philosophy. 99.9% of people are not that, nor do they have the ability to be that. In fact, most priests at the time weren't that. So Luther makes these arguments and people go to the local priest and they say, Luther said this. And the local priest is like, I don't know. I can't answer that. It's complicated. Because even the local priests weren't very well educated. They were educated enough to read the Bible and go, This is Jesus says treat people like you want to be treated. So that means if you like kicking people in the face, you probably shouldn't do that. Well, you just be nice to each other, right? Be nice. Can you be nice? Now let's sing a hymn. Like, they were educated enough to kind of just get through the service, to read the Bible and kind of be like, okay, this is what the words say. There's on another level. And we're going to see that the Catholic Church is going to respond to that by creating their own group of monks that are equal to Luther's arguments, that are equal to Luther's level. But anyway, we have almost no one can read the Bible. People are dumb. They're going to come up with a lot of different ideas. And then there's, what are you going to do with all the cool stuff that we get from the church? Like, there's a reason the Catholic Church has lasted 1,500 years. There's the sacraments, which are parties, right? Baptism is cool. You go, you say a few words, you dunk a baby, and everybody has a party afterwards. Boom. You have godparents, right? The whole town can have a party because all the babies are all baptized all at once, right? You have saints' days off. Hey, it's the Feast of St. Joseph. Nobody works. Like, the Protestants are going to get rid of all that. Well, which would you rather have? The religion that has days off, or the religion that says you have to work every day? Right? What about charity and community? If you're getting rid of the church, if you don't need the church, who's going to help poor people? If you don't have the church to bring everybody together from the farms, from the far-flung regions, but where's your community? Where are the young kids going to meet each other? Like, where are the teenagers going to hook up? Like, I went to school in rural New York. The church basement dance was a big effing deal for people, for like 12 through 16-year-olds. Like, once a month, there'd be a church, there'd be a gathering. They do some, teenage church reading stuff, right? And then there'd be a party. Be some drinks, some chips, right? Some chocolate. And then you put on some music that was church appropriate, but still modern, right? And you dance, and you meet, and you talk. And teenagers would have a safe space to, like, be teenagers, but kind of play with the coming of age part. But it was safe because it was at the church. There were some adults there who weren't involved. They were doing their own thing at their own table, playing canasta or, bridge or something, just making sure nobody made out in the corner, But otherwise, the church was the thing that brought people together. The sacraments, whether it's baptism or death, burial, bring people together. I have not gotten COVID yet. I know one day I will get COVID. How do I know I will get COVID one day? Because I go to funerals. I go to funerals for family members, for friends, for the parents of friends, for members of the community that I had relationships with. And you go, and it's togetherness. And you could wear a mask at the funeral, sure, but then you got to go and eat with everybody. And then you can't wear a mask because you got to eat. So there you go. But that's but that's community. That's bringing people together. Well, if you're going to get rid of that, if you're going to get rid of the church and the church hierarchy and the church telling you what to do and you can find your way to heaven, what's going to bring people together? We don't have bowling yet. So Luther doesn't really have a good answer for that. So what effect did the Reformation have on politics in Europe? It blew it up. It absolutely blew it up. It was a bomb that went off in the middle of Europe. From 1520 to 1648, you have continuous wars and civil wars. And it was all broke down on the idea that the Martin Luther said, you don't have to listen to the Pope. He told kings, you don't have to listen to the Pope. The Pope is leading your soul to hell. And you, as king, are leading your people's souls to hell. So kings didn't have to listen to the Pope. Well, that filtered down. If kings don't have to listen to the Pope, did the nobility have to listen to kings? And did peasants have to listen to the nobility or to the king? Like, if you're Protestant and your king is Catholic, is he leading you astray? Or if you're Catholic and your king wants to be Protestant, is that bad? Should you rebel? And so religious belief became a political act. It defined you as being loyal or treasonous. The problem is who defined what was loyal and who defined what was treasonous? Was it the people? Was it the king? Was it the church? Was it the Pope? Was it Luther? Like, who determined this? And so what we get is the pictures on the side. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in France, right? The German peasant revolt that erupts in the middle of Germany in the 1520s and 30s. Gustavus Adolphus, the Swedish king, coming out of the north with his Swedish army, his Protestant Lutheran army, to save Protestantism in the 1630s during the 30 Years' War, but guaranteeing that the 30 Years' War was going to go on for another 20 years. We get the Inquisition in Spain and Germany, this terrorism of people for ideas. The Inquisition starts off by arresting people, having a secret police that arrests people and then asks them, are you loyal to the king? And people, of course, say yes. And they go, well, are you a Protestant? Are you Jewish? Are you secretly a Muslim? Which is important in Spain more so than Germany, because remember, Spain was the Catholic reconquest from the Muslim kingdom. So there was Muslims and Jews living there. And so the question was, are you the right kind of Catholic? And if not, we're going to break your fingers and rip out your toes and do other things to you to find out if you're a Protestant. And if you are a Protestant, how many other Protestants are there? And so the Inquisition is a giant kind of terrorist act against people who don't know any of this stuff. They don't know. Remember, George Carlin, right? Think about how dumb the average person is and think about that half the people are dumber than him. So for a regular peasant, they don't know if Luther's right. They don't know if the Pope is right. They just know what the people around them have said. So there's the Inquisition. There's the 30 Years' War, which is the largest war in Europe since Rome versus Carthage. So we're talking, what? 600 years plus 300 years, right? 200, 250 years to 300 years. So we're talking nearly 1,000 years. And it's the religious war of the 30 Years' War. That's the largest war since Rome versus Carthage. 30 million people dead. It broke Europe into countries. Like there is a Holy Roman Empire, but no one, it's now France and it's Sweden, right? Denmark, England. You get countries after the 30 Years' War. And each country had a king, and that king determined the religion. There was no unity. No more were you going to be able to unify Europe into a new Roman Empire. You can't unify Europe into a Christian empire. So the idea of a Holy Roman Empire is dead. There will be a Holy Roman Empire that exists, and it calls itself the Holy Roman Empire, but a Holy Roman Empire doesn't exist. It can't, because there's now multiple religions, multiple countries, multiple kings, all who have the same legitimacy. Europe breaks up into pieces. And those pieces cannot be put back together. They can't be melded together. How did the Catholic Church react to this? Well, the Catholic Church was not going to go away, and so they rickrolled Europe. I'm never going to give you up. I'm never going to let you down. I'm never going to run around. and deserts you, the Pope becomes the Holy Father. We are going to make the Catholic Church unified again. That's how the Catholic Church reacted. A bit of terrorism and a bit of rickrolling. The Inquisition. The Protestants are terrorists. We are going to have to torture them. We're going to find them. We're going to have a secret police. We're going to murder them. We're going to dig them out. They are terrorists. What the Inquisition did was no different than what states have done with their secret police from this period to, the Iraq War, to 9/11, to after 9/11. You get informants. You arrest people clandestinely. You ship them off to prisons, say in Cuba, and you keep them out of the spotlight, and you ask them questions. And if they give you the wrong answers, you do things to them to get you the right answers. And if they die, well, they're a terrorist. Who cares? And so tens of thousands of people are going to be tortured and murdered by the Inquisition in Spain, in Portugal, in France, in Italy, in Germany. All right, that's one thing, right? But the second thing is going to be education, right? The Luther's advantage was he was better educated than the typical Catholic priest in a small little parish, say in Belgium. So what the Catholic Church needed was a way of responding philosophically to Luther. And that's going to be the Jesuits. The Jesuits are going to be better educated than Luther. They're going to show you the truth. Oh, you're going to say, oh, Luther says this on this pamphlet. And the Jesuit is going to be so well educated in theology, later in science, in various different things, they're able to refute and show why Luther is wrong. So that's education. We're going to invest in making the Catholic Church, at least one part of it, the Jesuits, much better educated. And still today, there's a large number of Jesuit priests. We have Jesuit colleges all over America, Holy Cross, right? Georgetown, Notre Dame, right? And many of the Jesuit priests that are there have PhDs. The Jesuits run some of the best astronomy labs in the world. So education. We're going to show you why Luther was wrong. Okay? So we got the Inquisition, we got terrorism, we got the secret police, we got education. We will show you regular folk why Luther's wrong. Okay? Also, awe. We're going to awe you. We're going to excite you. We're going to make you want to be Catholic. And that is art. That is music. That is fashion. That is color. That is the giant silk robes that Luther's like, oh, those are decadent. The problem with that argument is what is Luther going to wear? He's just going to wear a frock. He's going to wear a little, ministers are going to wear suits. Like, they're boring. You come out in this giant flowing red robe with a beanie on top because you're a cardinal, and that is like, wow. I am, as a liberal Catholic, a little upset by my Catholic Church's take on the LGBTQ culture war stuff that's going on in Europe and the Americas. And the reason why is my Catholic Church is full of men. There's no women as priests. So it's full of men who wear dresses in bright flowing colors. It is a lot of drag. Now, are they playing with is there a play with the gender fluidity? Yeah, a little bit. But is it also a hearkening back to a different time when men wore cloaks and shawls? I mean, I have a PhD, man. I have my robes. Every graduation I come out in blue and yellow as this medieval monk. And I roll it up, I put it over my head, I put my arms through the arms. It's a dress. I mean, I don't know what the technical definition of a dress is, but I don't have pockets. And if you need, if any woman who is listening to this can appreciate that, can appreciate anything that I'm talking about, it's having a dress with no pockets. I mean, I got none. I have no pockets. So I have to wear clothes underneath it that have pockets, but I can't access those clothes because I'm wearing a dress. And I have a beanie on top. So, I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but it's awesome. So you get Michelangelo, you get Raphael, you get St. Peter's, you get the Jesu. The Jesu is the Jesuit church in Rome that people kind of skip. Don't skip it because there's literal Aztec gold in the walls. The gold piping, the gold is Aztec gold from the New World. The roof of the building is painted as the sky. I walked into the Jesu. I have never been so blown away by a thing. I had to sit down and be like, just wow. And people skip it because they're like, oh, it's not this Roman thing or it's not this other thing. It's not. And I'm like, it's one of those wonders you just gotta see. You get Christmas, you get Easter, these giant parties, these religious, like I was in Rome. I participated in a monk chant parade through the middle of Rome. As it went from church to church to church, it was people lined the streets, and then as the monks walked by, you joined in. You walked with them, and you went all the way to St. Peter's. It was awesome. Protestantism doesn't have anything like that. And Christmas is nowhere close to how big Easter is. Easter's where all the Chinese silk robes come out, all the candles come out, all the celebrations come out. Like, it's the Hallelujah chorus. It's music. It's Michelangelo. It's all the stuff that Luther and the early Protestants said we got to get away from. It's all gaudy. It's all taking your mind away from. Regular folk love it because it's colorful and exciting and new and wealthy. So you blow their minds with art and music and culture. And the Catholic Church even reformed. In the Counter Reformation, they even had a Council of Trent where they sat down, they had the smartest people sit down and go, maybe Luther had a point. Now, this is 30 years later. So never accuse the Catholic Church of ever doing anything quick. But they did, after 30 years, admit maybe they had a problem and they had to respond to it. And that shows that the Catholic Church can reform. It is reformed in my lifetime. It reformed in my parents' lifetime with Vatican II. But then it reformed again under Pope Francis. Like, I go back to church and I got all the prayers wrong. I got all the chants wrong. I got, like, when I go back for a funeral, it's like, you know, it was peace be with you. And I would say also with you, but that's not what people say anymore. And I'm like, wait, how did that happen? My entire life it was, and also with you. And now it's like, I don't know, be your brother. I don't know what it is anymore. I'm lost. So I'm still Catholic, but it has reformed. And, well, that shows, that's a Council of Trent, that after 1,500 years, the Catholic Church can reform. All right, so that brings us to science. Well, why science? Why do we care about science? Science is a response to the disaster, to the wars, to the destruction that is the Protestant Reformation. Remember, we're talking about the Inquisition. We're talking about terrorism. We're talking about mass warfare, right, on a scale that hadn't been known in 1,000 years in Europe, right? And there's plenty of people who are doing the WTF. WTF, what's going on? So they needed a new way to prove truth. Because religion was a disaster. Saying, I have the right idea about God didn't work. The Catholics have theirs, Luther has theirs, the Calvinist has theirs, the Amish have theirs, the Methodists will have theirs. There's no provable answer. Which version of Jesus is right? You can't prove it. Jesus doesn't come down and say, the Mormons got it right. It doesn't work that way. In South Park it does, but not in Germany in the 1550s. So what you end up with is mass violence. So what science is trying to do is have a provable way of truth, of knowing truth. So why math? Math is either right or wrong. It's provable. It's also dispassionate. If you are going to get into a fight in a class in college, it's not going to be in your math class. You have never been angry about cosines. You might be angry you did bad on a math test, but you never said a cosine is lying to you. Whereas I have students who tell me when I talk about Darwin that I am a heretic, lying liar who I am not descended from monkeys. And then they flip the table and they march out of the class. You know, people get angry in my class. Look at the world today. Look at what conservatives are trying to ban. They're trying to ban history. Right? They're trying to ban sociology. They're trying to ban the study of people. They're not banning 2 + 2 = 4. So it's math is right or wrong. It's provable or it's not, but it's also dispassionate. And so math becomes the language of science. You don't have science without math. And math, and this is important, is completely reliant on Arabic numerals and Indian theoretical math like the number 0. Latin, Greek, the Hebrews all had mathematical systems that came out of letters. You know this from your Roman numerals. I is 1, I is 2. So you literally showed people, illiterate people, how much of a thing it was. Right? So that works for business. That works for adding and subtracting. But it doesn't work for theoretical knowledge, for chemistry, for physics. It just doesn't. And you can see that in the philosophy, right? Socrates, Plato, Aristotle don't use math. They use logic. This works, thus this follows, right? So they don't use math. They don't have the math to use. So for science to work, a revolution in math had to happen. And a lot of that math had to come from the Arabic world. So what was the role of new technologies in science? Well, they extend the senses. They allow people to see things they couldn't see before. Hooke and his microscope saw that blood is actually a solid. Now, I know that we biology people go, it's not actually a solid, but when you bleed and you look at it, you go, that's a liquid. That's clearly a liquid. But under a microscope, there's white blood cells, there's red blood cells, and those are solids. They are coherent. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and they are separate from the plasma around them. So you don't see that when you cut yourself. When I cut myself, do I not bleed? That's liquid, but it's not a liquid. It's actually billions, trillions of solids that are lubricated and moving against each other all over your body. Galileo's telescope allowed him to see the moons of Jupiter. And that's the little piece of paper. If you're watching the video, that's a little piece of paper is where Galileo is writing that he's seen the moons of Jupiter move. So I put this into the thing because that's the piece of paper where he's figuring it out. And he's going, oh my God, Aristotle's wrong. I got to tell people about this. Copernicus could tell you mathematically that Aristotle was wrong, but people didn't really trust it at that point. And people still don't trust, the educated elites. They got to see it with their own eyes. And that's Galileo. You see the moons of Jupiter. Why do the moons of Jupiter matter? Because if they're moons of Jupiter, then they don't go around the Earth. They go around Jupiter. A moon of Jupiter, by definition, goes around Jupiter. If it's going around Jupiter, it's not going around the Earth, which means, by definition, the Earth can't be the center of the universe. Other things are going around other things. Maybe the Earth goes around the sun. Dun, dun, dun. And if that's true, if blood is the solid, if Jupiter has moons, then maybe everything we thought was wrong? Maybe? And that's a scary place to be, that suddenly science is saying everything you thought was wrong. So guess who has an attitude towards science? Conservatives do. Because of course they do. Science is now the new liberal thing. It's telling you everything you think is wrong. And guess who doesn't like that? Conservatives don't like being told that, because conservatism, by its nature, says things are right the way they are. They don't need to change. And if they do, only very slowly, right? Things are fine. So what's the conservative attitude towards science? Is no, no, no. In fact, Galileo will say, look through my telescope, and then the people who are putting him on trial will say, no, 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 it's a trick. I don't want to see it. And why would they have this attitude? Why would they be so against science? And it's very philosophical. If science is right and Aristotle is wrong, then maybe the king, the church, and the Bible is wrong too. And if they're all wrong, if Aristotle's wrong, if the king is wrong, if the church is wrong, if the Bible is wrong, then what would you have? What would you replace them with? You'd have chaos. You would have absolute chaos. And so science had to be wrong. And not only did it have to be wrong, it had to be so wrong, you have to destroy science and the ideas. So we're going to make Galileo recant. We're going to burn books. Or more importantly, we're just going to arrest or fine people who publish scientific books. And the idea of that is to get you to self-censor. It's much harder to arrest, to try, to burn the book once it's made. It's much easier to get people to just not do the thing in the first place. So self-censorship is really what the goal is, to make science wither on the vine. Because for science to work, lots of people need to be sharing ideas. Ideas can't be siloed off. They need to build on each other. They need to prove each other is right or wrong. If you don't have that, you can't have science, and science would just die. And then the king and the church will reinforce, will come back and say, don't worry, little heads. Aristotle was right. Ptolemy was right. The ancients were right. The Bible is right. The earth was created in 7 days. Don't worry your little head about it. The problem is that science is science. And science was right. And this is the great, it might be apocryphal, but the great kind of FU that Galileo had. So Galileo recants, right? He's forced into house arrest. He goes into prison, but in his home, he's told, get rid of all your books, right? And the great FU from Galileo is, as he's given this sentence, he will no longer be a scientist. His knowledge will not be shared with anybody. He's coming off the stand. He's coming off into the gallery, and he goes past the people, the prosecution, the judges who have made him recant. And he gives the little aside. It still moves. Meaning, you can make me say anything you want. You can make me recant. The earth still moves. You can't deny reality. Not forever. And that will be 100 years later when we get Newton. By Newton, science has won. Galileo is the kind of high point of the conservative attack. But by Newton, science is cool. Scientists are cool. Like, here's a picture of Newton's sarcophagus in Westminster Abbey. Have you ever seen anything so cool? First of all, he's laying there with robes like Mark Antony. He's got laurels. He's on these books. He's got angels. Like, he's got a globe above him. Like, it's got his entire biography underneath him. He's in Westminster Abbey. I mean, it is a thing. And he does, like, big things. He invents calculus. And I know you hate calculus. And if you've been stuck in calculus or pre-calc, you're like, oh my God, this is terrible. He invented that. He made your life worse on a bet. He was drinking with a friend. They were getting hammered. And the friend is like, hey, Newt. I got a question. And Newton's like, yeah. Woo! Yep, I shouldn't have had the seventh. The seventh one was just a little too much. And the friend is like, okay, I've been thinking about this, Newt. You're a smart guy. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I got to get through this. If the circle is the perfect form of geometry, it's the perfect geometric shape. Plato tells us this, and Newton says, yes. Okay. If it's a perfect geometric shape, then why don't the planets go around as circles? Why are they in these weird little ellipses? Ellipses are ugly. They don't make any sense. They get near, and then they get far, and then they get near, and they get far, and they're like this slingshotty thingy. And Newton's like, I'm going to order chicken wings, and I have no effing idea. But you know what? I'm going to try to figure it out. Let's get extra spicy. Some ghost peppers for us. And I'll figure this out. And that's calculus. Calculus is made on a bet to explain why planets are in an ellipse, not in a circle. The answer, gravity. Right? It is a slingshot. It does look like a slingshot because it is a slingshot. You get close to the sun, and then the sun's gravitational pull shoots you back out. And then as you get far away, it's like, hey, yo, like a lasso brings you back in. But here's the thing. How do you prove that? You're on Earth. You can't see that. So you need to have all of this complex math to help, right? White light. He shows that white light is a combination of colors. What artist would believe that? You can't get white from combining all your colors, and yet white light is. He proves God exists. So this is, again, like Thomas Aquinas. The idea that God and science, religion and science are at war is not true. He proves God exists in his Principia Mathematica. And he updates Aristotle and Aquinas in doing it. He's using the same argument, the unmoved mover. He's using multiple arguments that are right out of Aquinas and right out of Aristotle. He's a proto-environmentalist. Now, if you said, oh, you're an environmentalist, oh, you're liking Greenpeace, he wouldn't know what you were talking about. But his idea was the universe is perfectly run. God invented the universe, and it just works, man. It's perfect. So who F's it up? Only people can F it up. They put in their cities, they put in their farms, they have too many animals, they have too few animals, they kill the wrong animals, humans mess up the balance. And if you've ever seen like 12 Monkeys or The Matrix, you see that is an argument in Western philosophy, that it's God made the universe and then humans have been effing it up ever since. I mean, that's literally how Noah starts, right? God is there. He's like, I made the universe, and look at what the humans did to it. What if I just murder them all and start over? Maybe I could get it better this time. That's the start of Noah. So the Noah story actually goes back to Gilgamesh, so that's 2500 BC. The Noah story is somewhere around 500 or so BC, 600 BC, but the idea goes back to Gilgamesh, which is 2500, 2000 to 2500 BC. So we're talking almost as long as people could write. They have talked about how humans mess up the universe. But Newton has the math that kind of shows it. So what do we talk about? We talked about humanism, that people matter. And when we get to science, look at the science. Like we talk about Luther, we talk about Newton, we talk about Galileo. We talk about people, individuals, not institutions. The institution, the church that tries to stop the individuals, fails for a couple of reasons. One is it starts as inflexible. It says, we will not change. And then when it does change, it changes a little too late. The genie is already out of the bottle. And then it repeats the mistake with science, right? Repeats the mistake a generation later with science of being inflexible. Government doesn't really work, right? The kings, the nobles, the people, they're all fighting each other, right? Kings are fighting kings, nobles are fighting kings, people are fighting nobles and kings. Like, government's a mess. Government's an absolute mess. So the institutions weren't working. And into that comes humanism. The idea that you, little old you, in the sea of other people, that you are important and that your life is important and that your ideas are important. And science will give a language, math, to allow people to explain the world, to allow people to break away from the church, from Aristotle, and to move on into new things. So thank you very much. Be safe. Take care.